During the company party at the boss's house, everyone was relaxed, laughing, toasting to another successful year. The atmosphere was light, faces illuminated by the euphoria of music and alcohol. But inside me, the storm was already raging. Every fake smile I exchanged, every polite handshake, every glance thrown toward the woman who, until that moment, everyone believed to be my faithful wife, was an invisible blow piercing me. I knew everything. Every dirty detail, every lie whispered into the phone, every encounter hidden behind cheap excuses. And that night, amid the collective toast, I raised my glass and announced, "I'm getting a divorce." Silence swallowed the music. The sound of clinking glasses stopped. Eyes turned to me as if I had just confessed to a heinous crime. Some laughed, thinking it was a poorly thought-out joke. Others, perplexed, tried to decipher what was happening. She, the woman who stabbed me in the back, froze. His eyes widened for a moment before he tried to compose himself, as if this were some kind of mistake, as if he could control the narrative with another one of his well-constructed lies. "What kind of joke is this?" she whispered between her teeth, trying to keep her smile for the guests. I took a deep breath. I felt the weight of the years, of wasted love, of broken trust. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to make a fuss. The poison was already injected. "It's no joke," I replied. "You will all know the truth soon." The whispering began, a growing buzz of curiosity and suspicion. The boss, owner of the house and host of the party, frowned. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice cutting through the charged environment. I could respond immediately, throw all the dirt on the table right then and there. But I wanted to taste it. I wanted her to feel the ground slowly crumbling beneath her feet, like I felt when I discovered her betrayal. She tried to grab my arm, her nails digging into my skin in a last-ditch effort for control. "Don't do that here, not now," she hissed, forcing a smile as she looked around, seeing everyone watching us. But there were no more pleas that could make me turn back. The plan had been in motion for a long time, and I had been waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the final blow. I knew about the betrayal for months. I found out in the worst way possible, in the way that any betrayed person fears, irrefutable evidence, so clear and devastating that it made my heart stop for a moment before returning to reality like a cold blade against the skin. First there were the subtle signs, deleted messages, changes in behavior, unexplained absences. Then, the truth is revealed. I could have confronted him right away, I could have shouted, demanded explanations. But no. I wanted more. I wanted justice, I wanted her to feel the same helplessness that I felt. So I planned. Quiet, cold, meticulous. And now, in front of everyone, she knew something was coming. His smile began to falter, his voice trembled slightly. "Can we talk in private?" she tried, grabbing my hand desperately, but I let go with the same coldness with which she discarded me in the moments when she gave herself to another man. "There's nothing to talk about," I declared, my voice echoing throughout the room. "Everything has already been decided." The boss approached, worried, and the co-workers now formed a circle around us, like spectators in an arena, waiting for the outcome of an unexpected show. Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered something about me being drunk, about it being a freakout. But I was more sober than ever. The cheating wife realized she was trapped. He tried to take control of the narrative, shaking his head with a forced laugh. "You know how he is, sometimes he exaggerates," he said, looking around, looking for support, trying to turn it into a passing joke. But no one smiled. The eyes were on me, waiting for the explanation. "Exaggeration?" I repeated, savoring the irony. "So let's see if everyone thinks I'm exaggerating when they know what really happened." Her expression changed. Fear began to grow in his eyes. She knew the theater was coming to an end. She knew that, unlike the times she lied and got away with it, this time the truth would come out without her being able to control the narrative. She swallowed hard, and I saw her body stiffen, like a cornered animal realizing that escape was no longer an option. The lover. Where was he? Maybe he was at that party too. Maybe he was among the guests, nervous, in a cold sweat, hoping I wouldn't say his name. He knew that I knew. And now, as the silence became unbearable, he must also be reliving the moments when he thought he would never be discovered. Everyone was waiting for the revelation. The mood was electric, as if the air was charged before a storm. But I was in no hurry. He knew that every second of tension was another blow to his confidence, a heavier burden on his shoulders. So I took a deep breath, stepped forward and looked directly at her. "The truth always finds its way," I murmured. And in that instant, I saw the despair on his face. She knew it was the end. But what she didn't know yet, was that I had already prepared everything. Every detail. Every consequence. The divorce was already signed. The assets were already protected. And everything she thought she owned, was no longer hers. But what happened next was even worse for her. Something no one expected. Something that made everyone side with me without hesitation. Something that changed everything. And when the truth was finally revealed, there was no more doubt. The game was over. And I had already won. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is never romanticized or justified. All the stories are fictional, but the moral is real. Betrayal destroys lives, corrodes relationships, and always exacts a high price. Get ready for an intense narrative, full of twists, raw emotions and unexpected consequences. Now, take a deep breath, because what you are about to hear is going to shock you. The event hall sparkled under crystal chandeliers, reflecting the sparkle of glasses raised in lively toasts. The company boss's spacious and sophisticated home housed more than 100 guests, all dressed in their best attire, laughing, talking, celebrating. It was one of those nights where success was in the air, where professional alliances were strengthened and where fake smiles mixed with sincere congratulations. In the middle of the party, among executives in impeccable suits and wives showing off shiny jewelry, were Daniel and Laura, a couple who, in everyone's eyes, seemed to be the personification of stability in mutual respect. Married for almost a decade, they had a life that, for many, was a source of envy. He is one of the company's main directors, with an established career, admired by his colleagues and respected by his boss. She, a woman with a striking presence, always elegant, charismatic, owner of a natural magnetism that made her shine in any environment. Together, they made an admirable pair. Or at least that was the impression they gave. Daniel has always been a centered man, dedicated to work and family. Their professional commitment ensured that they achieved a comfortable life, with trips to exotic destinations, dinners in sophisticated restaurants and a luxurious apartment in the city center. But for him, true success was in the simple moments: Friday nights watching movies with Laura, lazy Sunday breakfasts and long conversations about the future. He loved his wife, or at least he believed he loved her in the most genuine way possible. He never imagined that love could be questioned until he began to feel, little by little, that something between them was different. Laura was an engaging woman. He knew how to captivate the people around him and he did it naturally. Since the beginning of the relationship, he was always the person who lit up wherever he was. Her smile had the power to dissolve tension, and the way she spoke, always confident, made anyone feel special. With Daniel, in the early years, the relationship was intense, full of passion and complicity. But, as with many stories, time began to alter the dynamic between them. Small changes began to appear, and Daniel began to notice the growing distance. There were nights when he would wait for her in the living room, eager to tell her the day's news, only to have her arrive late, saying she was exhausted and needed a shower before bed. The weekends that were previously full of programs together started to be occupied by meetings between her and friends or activities that he wasn't sure if they were necessary. At first, he didn't see anything wrong with it. After all, everyone needed space. But the intervals between them became so long that when they were together, the silence seemed heavier than any words. At that party, as they circulated among the guests, Daniel watched Laura carefully. She was radiant as always, interacting with everyone with her impeccable posture. He saw the sparkle in her eyes when she talked to others, a sparkle he no longer felt when they were alone. The dress she wore highlighted her elegance, her gestures were calculated, and the way she laughed, tilting her head back in a graceful manner, made the men around her watch her with admiration. Daniel had always been proud to be by her side, but that night, for the first time, he felt a deep discomfort, a feeling he couldn't fully explain. Maybe it was just tiredness. In recent months, he had been overwhelmed with work and was unable to pay the attention he wanted to his marriage. He tried to convince himself that Laura was just filling this void in other ways, with new friendships, new interests. But deep down, something in him insisted that it wasn't just that. There was a heaviness in the atmosphere, a tension he couldn't ignore. The company boss, host of the party, approached them with a wide smile. He was proud of his team and enjoyed maintaining good relationships with his employees. Between one conversation and another, he praised Daniel for his competence, made a joking comment about how Laura was a lucky woman and toasted their professional partnership. The atmosphere around was relaxed, but Daniel felt that something was out of place. Maybe it was the fact that Laura, throughout the night, avoided direct eye contact with him. Or maybe it was just the way some people exchanged discreet glances as they passed by. Laura, in turn, tried hard to remain natural. I knew I was under everyone's eyes and that I needed to act as I always did. But inside her, anguish grew. He had a secret kept under lock and key, a secret that, if revealed, would change everything. Music played in the background, smooth jazz filling the empty spaces between conversations. The air was permeated with the aroma of the refined dishes served by the waiters, mixed with the expensive perfume of the women who paraded through the room. The hours passed slowly, and Daniel, amidst the smiles and social interactions, felt as if he were in a movie in which all the characters followed a rehearsed script, except him. There was something he didn't know. Something he needed to find out. Laura continued to move between groups, her voice always controlled, her responses measured. But when Daniel lightly touched her waist as he passed her, he felt her body stiffen. A simple gesture, but one that said a lot. That was enough for him to understand that the connection between them was no longer the same. The problem was knowing how far this would go. At that moment, among the glasses rising in new toasts and the laughter echoing throughout the room, Daniel made a decision. It wouldn't be that night that he would find all the answers, but he knew he could no longer ignore his own feelings. He had been patient until then, trying to believe that everything was just a phase. But now, everything seemed to indicate that he was about to discover something that would change his life forever. Laura, on the other hand, was beginning to realize that her tranquility was coming to an end. I knew I couldn't hide everything forever, that sooner or later the pieces would start to fall into place. But what she didn't know, was that Daniel was already one step ahead. The clock on the wall showed almost midnight when Daniel discreetly left the party, without anyone noticing. His heart was beating heavily in his chest, not because of the alcohol he had consumed throughout the night, but because of the weight of distrust that had accompanied him for weeks. Something inside him screamed, demanding answers, demanding truths he feared to find. Laura's expression during the party, the look she averted, the discomfort that emanated from her presence. Everything felt wrong. He knew it wasn't madness, that it wasn't paranoia. There was something there, something bigger than he wanted to admit. He got into the car, took a deep breath and made the decision he had been putting off for too long. He needed to confirm his suspicions, he needed to follow the tracks she had been leaving, even without realizing it. He took out his cell phone, opened the shared location application they had used for years and saw that Laura was still there, at the party. That meant he wouldn't go running after her that night, but he could start putting the puzzle together with the pieces he already had. The last few weeks have been strange. Uncertain schedules, empty excuses, the coldness in the touches that were so natural before. When did this all start? When did their love become just a social formality? He tried to remember the last time Laura looked at him with genuine desire, without obligation, without the need to support the image of a perfect couple they carried. He didn't make it. The tightness in his chest intensified. The need to know turned into urgency. He arrived home, opened his notebook and accessed the email accounts that, until recently, he shared without fear. Nothing. No suspicious messages, no obvious clues. So, he decided to look at the landline calls. There, he found the first signs. Repeated numbers, specific times, a constant frequency. He investigated a little more and discovered that that number belonged to someone from the company itself. A colleague. Someone close. His stomach dropped. The following days were a test of patience. I needed to act intelligently, with precision. He couldn't confront her without definitive proof, without the absolute certainty that his intuition wasn't playing tricks. Then, he began to observe. Small details that previously seemed insignificant now had enormous weight. The messages received that made her smile differently, the moments when she turned off the phone as soon as he entered the room, the meetings that didn't exist before and that now took up her nights. Everything fell into place like a predictable script. The following Friday, he said he would have a business dinner and would arrive late. Laura didn't seem surprised, nor disappointed. On the contrary, she smiled with a certain relief, as if his absence was a relief from her own plans. Little did she know that Daniel wasn't going anywhere. He waited patiently, watching his wife's every move, until she left the house wearing a dress he hadn't seen in a while, the one he always wore on special occasions. But that night wasn't special. Not for him. He followed her from afar, maintaining the caution of someone who needed to see with their own eyes before believing. The journey was short, to a discreet hotel in the farthest part of the center. Laura got out of the car, looked around quickly and walked into the place without hesitation. Daniel stopped the car a few meters away, his breathing quickened, blood pulsing in his ears. He felt a lump in his throat, a feeling that mixed anger, disbelief and pain. Minutes later, he saw the man arriving. The same number that showed up on calls, the same man who worked with him every day, shaking his hand, smiling at him as if nothing was happening. He entered the hotel leisurely, sure that no one would ever find out. But Daniel was there. And now there were no more doubts. He didn't go in right away. He stood still, staring at the hotel's facade, feeling every fiber of his body contort with the reality that was finally revealing itself. Everything he built, everything he protected, everything he believed to be solid, crumbled before his eyes. Your wife. Your wife. In another man's arms. The betrayal was like a knife stuck in his chest, and the pain was unbearable. Anger tried to take over him, the impulse to enter that room and destroy everything. But instead, he took a deep breath. There was something bigger than her pain at stake. He wouldn't do anything on impulse, not right now. He had to think, he had to act coldly, meticulously, the way he always did in his career. And it was at that moment that something inside him changed. I wouldn't just confront them. He wouldn't just scream, demand explanations, ask her to choose between him and that man. No. He already knew what he needed to do. He knew that this betrayal would not end with tears and forced regrets. I knew this story would have a much bigger outcome. He turned slowly, walked back to his car, and drove back home. His face no longer had the expression of a betrayed man. No. What appeared in his eyes that night was something much deeper. Something that would change everything. The hall of the chief's house was completely silent, as if time had frozen for an instant. Daniel remained standing in the center of the room, his gaze firm, unwavering. The announcement of the divorce echoed in the minds of everyone present, but no one yet fully understood the weight of that revelation. Laura was static, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides, as if trying to hold the ground before it collapsed beneath her feet. The lover, among the guests, remained motionless, not knowing whether to react or pretend that nothing was happening. The company boss broke the silence, approaching cautiously. His expression mixed confusion and authority. "Daniel, can you explain to us what's going on? This doesn't seem like a decision made in the heat of the moment." He took a deep breath, feeling the metallic taste of anger mixed with an almost perverse relief. He turned to Laura, observing every detail of her expression. She tried to maintain her composure, but her eyes betrayed her. There was fear in them. "The truth is simple," he said with surgical calm, "my wife cheated on me." The impact of those words was immediate. A murmur ran through the room, eyes turning to Laura, who opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. His lips trembled, his mask falling in front of everyone. He tried to regain control of the situation, approaching Daniel, his voice low and urgent. "Can we talk in private?" Her plea was almost inaudible, but he wouldn't answer it. "Not this time." "Do you want to talk now?" He laughed humorlessly, staring at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. "You didn't want to talk when you were sneaking out, when you were giving yourself to another man while I trusted you." He took a step forward, staring at her with the coldness of someone who no longer felt pain, only contempt. "You betrayed me and thought you would never be found out, thought you could keep up that lie forever. But what you didn't know, Laura, is that I was always one step ahead." The silence became unbearable. The lover looked away, trying to subtly move away, but Daniel noticed. "Ah, don't try to sneak out," his voice carried an icy firmness. "You're also part of this story, aren't you? My coworker, my so-called friend. You knew exactly what you were doing, and yet you continued. You stared at me every day, greeted me, shook my hand, while you slept with my wife behind my back." Laura tried to intervene, her voice breaking. "Daniel, please, it's not like this. Isn't that so?" He laughed again, shaking his head, not believing what he was hearing. "What's it like then, Laura? Explain to me. I want to hear from you what it's like to have a devoted husband at home while you sleep with another man in a cheap hotel room." She closed her eyes, tears forming, but not out of regret. It was fear. Fear of what was to come. The boss looked at everything without reaction, the guests were frozen, as if they were watching a show where each act was more impactful than the previous one. But Daniel wasn't finished. He had waited for this moment, and now that he had it, he wouldn't waste it. "Do you want to know why everyone here is going to side with me?" He looked around, making sure everyone was paying attention. Laura shuddered. She knew he had more. "I knew that this was not the end of the humiliation. Because while she was cheating on me, I was preparing myself," he continued, his voice firm and calculated. "Over the last few months, I've gathered every piece of evidence, every detail, every move she thought she was hiding. I thought I had to be careful, but in the end, she did it all for me. So careless, so convinced she would never be discovered." Laura's expression was one of pure terror. She tried to say something, but her voice broke. His body trembled slightly. "Daniel, for God's sake, you don't need to do that here." He ignored it. "I moved our money. I protected my assets. The joint accounts? Empty. The apartment? Now mine alone. You, Laura, have nothing left." Her eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "What?" "You heard me right," his voice carried a tone of quiet triumph. "In the last few months, while you were busy with your hidden meetings, I reorganized everything. You trusted so much that I would never suspect, that I would never react, but I was seeing everything, preparing every detail. The divorce has already been filed. You are not entitled to anything. Every penny you thought was yours, every asset you thought you owned, every plan you made, everything, is gone." The whispers became loud, the room vibrating with the shock of that revelation. The lover looked from side to side, not knowing what to do, as if looking for an invisible exit. Laura, in turn, looked like she was about to fall apart. His chin was shaking, his eyes were blinking rapidly, trying to process the scale of what he had just heard. "No, you can't do that. I already did." She staggered back a step, as if gravity had shifted around her. Her eyes were glassy, and for the first time, Daniel saw in her what he wanted to see since he discovered the betrayal: despair. The boss cleared his throat, finally managing to recover from the shock. "Daniel, this is something serious. Are you sure about all this?" He just nodded, still looking at Laura. "I have proof. If I need it, I can show it. But it's no longer necessary. She knows I'm telling the truth." Laura hugged her body, her eyes still teary, but now empty. A heavy silence fell between them. And then, as a final blow, Daniel took a deep breath and took his last step. "I hope it was worth it." His voice was barely a whisper now, charged with something much deeper than anger. "Because you'll never get another chance." And then, he turned his back, walking slowly out of the room, leaving behind not only a destroyed marriage, but a woman who, in that moment, finally understood the weight of the choices she had made. The party was still around, but to Laura, everything seemed like a distant blur, a suffocating echo of laughter and conversations that no longer made sense. The judgmental looks weighed on her like a growing shadow, every whisper, every expression of surprise and disapproval pushed her into an abyss from which she knew she could not escape. The humiliation was not just in the words spoken by Daniel, but in the silence that followed, in the space between each breath caught in the air. He had ended everything surgically, without a single scream, without a single impulsive gesture, just with indisputable truths that stripped her of any argument. She tried to move, but her legs felt rooted to the ground, as if the world itself refused to give her any chance of escape. "I wanted to run, I wanted to hide, I wanted anything other than to be there, exposed in front of everyone." Her eyes searched for her lover, as if he were somehow the anchor that would save her from sinking, but he was already far away. Disappeared. Coward. And that hurt more than anything, more than Daniel's cold gaze, more than his razor-sharp words. She knew he would run away. I knew deep down he was never there for her. But seeing it come to fruition, seeing him walk away without even a word, without even a look, was like feeling the last thread of dignity being ripped from your hands. The room around her seemed to spin, and for a moment she felt like she couldn't keep her balance. Shame burned his skin, everyone's eyes pierced his soul. He felt the need to scream, to beg, but there was no more room for that. Daniel had said everything, done everything, and now all that was left was absolute emptiness. The idea of having nothing left, of having lost everything in a matter of minutes, made his chest constrict in despair. The boss cleared his throat, trying to ease the discomfort, but even he couldn't disguise the tension that hung in the air. Some guests looked away, others continued watching, fascinated by the spectacle of the ruin of a woman who, until minutes ago, seemed untouchable. She had never felt so small, never felt so vulnerable. The confident woman, the charming woman, the one who knew exactly how to behave in any situation, was gone. All that was left was someone aimless, with no way out. Laura forced her feet to move, fighting the inertia of her own collapse. I needed to get out of there, I needed to breathe. But each step was heavy, as if her shame trailed behind her, refusing to let her move forward. When he finally managed to reach the door of the house, a shaky sigh escaped his lips. The cold night air touched his hot skin, but it brought no relief. His heart was still pounding in his chest, his hands were still shaking. His eyes turned to the darkness of the garden, as if hoping to find something there, an answer, a solution. But there was only emptiness. She heard footsteps behind her. For a second, she thought it was Daniel, that maybe, somehow, he was still willing to listen to her, but when she turned around, she found the boss, his expression filled with a regret she didn't want to see. He hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. I didn't expect that, Laura. His voice was low, but filled with disappointment. You know this won't just end here. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the truth. You knew. That night's exhibition would not soon be forgotten. Daniel not only revealed the betrayal, he destroyed any possibility of keeping his reputation intact. His name would be whispered in the hallways, repeated in disguised conversations, analyzed and judged by everyone. His work, his connections, everything was threatened. The boss took a deep breath and continued. I've always valued you as a professional, but I can't ignore that. The company's image is at stake. He didn't need to say anything else. She understood perfectly what that meant. I would lose everything. The despair intensified. Her life, built with so much effort, was crumbling before her eyes, and she could do nothing to stop it. His hands balled into fists, a tremor running through his body. He wanted to cry, scream, justify himself, but he knew there was no justification that would change that moment. I was alone. All alone. She walked out of the house aimlessly, her heels sinking slightly into the damp grass. He walked to the car, but didn't have the strength to get in. He leaned against the door, his arms crossed against his body, as if he could stop everything from falling apart around him. The night seemed darker than ever, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure what I would do next. Meanwhile, Daniel drove without a specific destination, just feeling the need to get away from everything, to breathe something other than the weight of that night. His mind was not at peace. He got what he wanted. The betrayal was exposed, Laura was faced with the consequences of her choices, but the emptiness inside him did not dissipate. The pain was still there, pulsing, alive. He had won, but he felt no satisfaction. His thoughts turned to the last few years, to everything he sacrificed for his marriage, to everything he believed to be true. He questioned whether at any point Laura really loved him or whether it was all just a well-elaborated construction of convenience. Did the love he felt still exist in some form? Or was that just a remnant of a past that was never real? The cell phone vibrated on the car dashboard. He didn't want to answer, he didn't want to hear anything else. But something inside him made him look. It was a message from a number he didn't immediately recognize. The contents made his body go cold. Laura wasn't the only one who had secrets. There's something you need to know. The message was accompanied by an attachment. A document. Something that could change everything again. Daniel's heart quickened. He thought that night's revelation was the end of the story. But maybe, there was still more to come. Daniel parked the car on a lightly traveled street, far enough away to be alone, but close enough not to feel completely isolated. The glow of his cell phone screen illuminated his face as he stared at the cryptic message. Laura wasn't the only one who had secrets. There's something you need to know. This could be a trap, a mistake, or perhaps, a new piece in the game he thought he had already finished. His fingers hesitated before opening the attachment. A document, some images. As he scrolled through the pages, his breathing became ragged, his entire body tensed. The details were there, cold and merciless. Suspicious bank transactions, messages exchanged at times that didn't coincide with Laura's clandestine meetings, names he didn't recognize. Something much bigger was happening. His wife's betrayal had already been devastating, but this changed everything. His first instinct was to look for answers, but he needed to choose carefully how he would do that. I was still processing the impacts of what I had discovered that night. Every decision needed to be calculated. He took a deep breath and typed a reply to the unknown number. Who are you? What else do you know? The silence after sending the message was agonizing, as if the world was holding its breath along with him. As he waited, he tried to compose himself. He looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror and almost didn't recognize the man he saw. Tired eyes, hard expression, the weight of the last few months written on every line of his face. He had won, exposed the betrayal, taken control of the situation, but he still felt that the war was not over. The cell phone vibrated again. A new message. That's just the surface. Can we meet? Daniel gripped the steering wheel. He knew he should think before making any rash decisions, but he had already spent too much time ignoring signs, too much time pretending that the life he led was safe. Where and when, he typed. The answer came quickly. Tomorrow morning, at the cafe on the corner of Maple Street. Turn the cup up when you're ready to talk. Too much crypticism. But what did he have to lose? He put his cell phone in his pocket and started the car. The night still seemed long, and inside him, he felt that the true outcome of that story was yet to come. The next morning, he sat down on one of the benches in the cafe. The atmosphere was modest, with few customers at that hour. He picked up the cup of coffee in front of him, observing the dark liquid for a moment before taking a sip. The bitter taste reflected what he felt inside. A dilemma was growing inside him: keep digging and discover more truths, or just move on. He turned the cup upside down. Minutes later, a woman with her hair tied in a bun entered and walked directly to her table. He looked at him, assessing him carefully, before sitting down. You have no idea what's going on, do you? His voice was firm, blunt. Daniel watched her for a moment, analyzing her. It seems not. And you seem to know more than I do. She pulled an envelope from her purse and slid it across the table. Laura didn't just cheat on you, Daniel. She was involved in something much bigger. That money that disappeared from your joint accounts. It wasn't just a careless separation of assets. It was planned. He opened the envelope and found more documents, bank statements, transactions made in Laura's name that he never authorized. His eyes narrowed, his heart hammering in his chest. What is that? It appears that his wife was embezzling money from the company. The words echoed in his mind, and he felt a chill run down his spine. That doesn't make sense. She never needed that. She always had everything. The woman crossed her arms. And yet the numbers don't lie. Someone figured it out, and you know what that means. He knew. It was a scandal that went far beyond marital betrayal. It was destruction of reputation, possible arrest, loss of everything they had once built. Daniel rubbed his face, trying to process the new information. Why are you telling me this? She smiled sideways. Let's just say I have my own interests in seeing this resolved. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. He had planned to expose Laura, but he never imagined that something of this level was happening behind the scenes. Do you have hard evidence? Something I can take to the boss? The woman nodded. Yes. But you need to decide quickly. Things can get out of hand quickly. He leaned on the table, feeling a new weight fall on his shoulders. There were so many layers to this story that he no longer knew where the real problem lay. The betrayal seemed like just a symptom of something much more rotten. What do you suggest? Take this to the company. Before it's too late. He knew he had no choice. When I entered the company that afternoon, everything seemed the same. Employees walked through the corridors unaware of the whirlwind that was about to form. Daniel walked to his boss's office, feeling the tension rising within him. The man was standing, looking at the window of his office, as if he already predicted that something big was about to happen. I need to talk to you, Daniel said, closing the door behind him. The boss slowly turned around, his eyes carrying absolute seriousness. I already know about Laura. The statement made the air leave Daniel's lungs. As? I got a report last night. The evidence is solid. I just wanted to see if you knew it too. Daniel let out a heavy sigh. I just found out. The boss nodded slowly, picking up one of the papers on his desk. She not only embezzled money, but also involved other people. This goes far beyond what we imagine. Daniel felt a new wave of anger rise within him. The betrayal and public humiliation were not enough. Now he was caught in the middle of a scheme that threatened to destroy much more than his marriage. What are we going to do? The boss looked at him, a look that said the decision had already been made. We need to act fast. And I hope you're ready for what's coming. Daniel knew at that moment that his war was not yet over. Laura didn't just destroy their marriage. She destroyed everything. And now, all that was left was to face the consequences. The meeting room was completely silent when Daniel entered. The curtains were closed, allowing only the cold light from the chandeliers to illuminate the room. The boss was sitting at the head of the long glass table, his eyes down on a thick file, his expression filled with a weight that few knew how to carry. On the other side of the room, Laura was sitting, her arms crossed, her legs tense, her gaze fixed on the wall, as if she wanted to teleport anywhere but there. The fall was quick. In less than 24 hours, everything she had built over the years turned to dust. The scandal not only destroyed his reputation in the company, but also left irreversible marks on his life. His name was already circulating in the halls, whispered among employees, spread through leaked emails. She knew she couldn't escape the consequences, but she still tried to hold on to what was left. Daniel sat down slowly, facing her across the table. There was a bitter satisfaction in seeing her in that position, in seeing her with no way out, but at the same time, there was no longer any pleasure in it. What he felt now was just a vacuum, an absolute indifference. He had already felt anger, contempt, humiliation. Now, I didn't feel anything anymore. Just tiredness. The boss cleared his throat, leaving the papers on the table. Laura, you know there's nothing you can do at this point. His voice was cold, professional, as if he were addressing an administrative problem rather than a person. The evidence is clear. You not only betrayed your own marriage, but you also betrayed this company. There is no more room for you here. She finally looked away from the wall and looked at him. There was desperation in his eyes, but also a hint of defiance, as if he still believed he could reverse everything. I never wanted it to come to this. His voice was weaker than he expected. I made mistakes, but it can't end like this. The boss leaned forward in his chair, his fingers intertwined on the table. But it's over, Laura. Your crimes aren't just moral. They're financial. What you did could land you in prison. The word hung in the air. Prison. She swallowed hard, hands gripping the edge of the table. I can give it all back. His voice was now a mix of pleading and desperation. I can make amends for what I did. Daniel let out a short, sarcastic laugh. You just want to make amends because you got caught. If no one had found out, you'd carry on, wouldn't you? Laura opened her mouth to retort, but closed it again. He was right. And she knew it. The boss sighed. Laura, your account has already been frozen, your access blocked. The process has already started. You are officially fired. And the legal department is already handling the criminal complaint. The room seemed to spin for her. She felt her eyes burn, but she refused to cry there, in front of him, in front of the man she once loved and who now looked at her as if she were a problem to be solved. The boss continued. But there is a less destructive way out. If you cooperate with the investigation, we may be able to avoid more severe criminal prosecution. Laura looked at him, her eyes full of despair. I need time. You don't have time. She felt the final weight of that sentence. There was no escape. She had lost all. Marriage, stability, respect from others, one's own future. She felt the world crumble around her, and for the first time, she understood what she had done to herself. She tried to look at Daniel, searching for a reaction, anything that would suggest there was still something there, some trace of the man who had once loved her. But he found nothing. Just merciless silence. Days later, Daniel watched the city from the top of the company building, feeling the cold wind against his face. A lot has changed in such a short time. Laura was officially prosecuted, and her case was ongoing. The news spread like wildfire, and now she was making headlines on business and corporate gossip websites. The lover, the one who once smiled at him with false cordiality, also fell. They discovered that he was involved in the embezzlement, and his reputation was dragged into the mud. He lost his job, lost his position, and, from what Daniel knew, his own wife kicked him out of the house. An ironic end for someone who thought he could get away with it without consequences. But what about him? What was left for him after all this? The truth was, even with his revenge complete, there was still a hole inside him. But unlike what I felt before, now that hole was not a wound, but an open space to start over. For the first time in years, he felt like he could build something new. For the first time, he was not a man trapped in a fake marriage, a life built on illusions. He was a free man. A light knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He turned around and saw a familiar figure enter. The woman who gave him the evidence against Laura, the one who, unintentionally, was the key for him to see the truth. She smiled restrainedly, but there was something else there. Something genuine. I heard you finally signed the divorce. He smiled sideways, a real smile, without resentment, without weight. Yes. I'm officially a single man. She tilted her head, watching him. And what are you going to do now? Daniel looked at the view again, taking a deep breath. I think for once I don't need to have all the answers. I just want to live. She approached, standing next to him, looking at the same landscape as him. So I think that's a good start. And for the first time in a long time, he agreed. And that was today's story. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of this ending? Was it satisfactory? Would you have done anything different? Leave your comment and tell me your opinion. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Here, we always show that betrayal is never worth it. Until next time.